Today we are painting with dots. Stippling is an easy way to add some texture to miniatures, and it's something I've kind of ignored for quite a while, and I wanted to work on it. So we're going to paint up this wizard using nothing but dots. Process of stippling, it's a little similar to dry brushing. You get a little paint on your brush, you wipe a little excess off, not as much as you would with a dry brush, and then just repeatedly stab at the miniature till we get a pattern to form. And obviously this is very hard on brushes, so for the first stage here where I'm really stabbing pretty hard, you can see I'm using a split tipped brush that's not usable for regular brushing anymore, but it works great for stippling. To begin with, I put down a base coat of turquoise, and now I'm using light turquoise for our first stage of stippling, and this is going to be pretty heavy. I did this actually in two stages. I let the first coat dry, and then I did another coat so the spots wouldn't blend together when wet. Even though we're stippling, we still need to do our regular highlighting and shading, and I switched over to a better brush now, and being more cautious with our stippling process, trying to pick out the areas where the light would hit, just like if we were doing layering. The one key thing to remember when stippling is that we don't want to completely cover up the paint that's showing underneath. If we put too much paint on with the stippling process and completely cover up what we previously did, well then we're not going to really have a stippling pattern anymore. We want all those colors to show through, but just less of that color to show through on the highlight areas. For the robes, the process is pretty much the same as on the cape. Starting off really rough with our stippling using a worse off brush, and then we're going to proceed to using a smaller brush and being more delicate about where we place all our little dots. In the case of the robes, we do have to be a bit more careful because there are much more folds, much more smaller folds that we have to highlight, and it's a little bit different than the process that we used on the cape. As a side note, I am using purple to shade our red, and that gives the red a bit more richness, and also using a little amount of purple here makes it easy to apply on some trim areas later on. So a little hint of this color here will be emphasized later on other parts of the miniature. Now we do have to go a little bit higher on our highlighting with the robes, more than we did on the cape, because there's so much more depth to the robes. There's a deeper recesses, there's tighter folds that we really have to emphasize. So we're adding about 2 more highlight steps here than we did on the cape, which is mainly just a flowing flat but slightly curved area, but there's no deep tight folds on the cape as opposed to the robes. So enough with the stippling. Now we're going to paint with dots, which is kind of the same thing that we just did. We're just doing it cleaner this time. I added some trim with our royal purple, and now I'm proceeding to just paint little tiny dots along the trim. In this case, I'm trying to do them in a pattern, so it's one dot in the center, then flanked by 2 by 1 by 2 by 1 by 2. Our dots need to be shaded and highlighted just like everything else, so the filthy brown here is actually the shade layer. Then I proceeded to go over it with sun yellow, and now what you're seeing here is the highlighting process with sun yellow and white. So I had to remove one part of the video here with the sun yellow because, as you can see, I kind of started trailing a little bit off to the left side of the screen. I apologize for that. Another example of how you can use dots to simply improve a paint job. In case of the hat, once again, we just applied a straight base coat of royal purple and now proceeding to add some dots to spice it up. So we're kind of foregoing our standard layering stage. And in this case, I try to do also a pattern with the dots, starting at the bottom and having them spread out at the bottom and sort of connecting in a line towards the top, which is really extremely hard to do with a cone shape. Up until now, we've been using just a paintbrush to paint all our dots, but you can use other tools. There are actual dotting tools that you can purchase. They're mainly used for sculpting and painting fingernails. In this case, I'm actually just using a toothpick, which is a very handy tool because it's cheap, disposable, and you can cut it and shape it to whatever size you want at the tip. Now, in this case, I'm not really going to highlight the dots. I'm using the toothpick dots as an outline for the dot I'm now placing in the center. So again, this is just a different way of applying texture through the use of dots on a miniature. The process for the belt was the exact same. However, I wanted to show you different colors. We went with extreme colors with the yellow and blue around the mantle, but here I'm using very similar colors, just different shades of purple on the belt. And you can see how much more blended in it is, and it's not as stark as on the mantle. So you can go subtle with the same patterns, with the same texture. Just by using different colors, you can get a different effect. Last thing to paint is the globe crystal ball, and a little bit of a different process here, but basically, once again, it's just painting with dots. We're just stabbing the brush at the miniature. Difference is this time we are doing it over wet paint. Started off with dark blue, let that dry, and now I'm just using dark blue and white in different ratios and just kind of smearing all the paint around. So a few areas will have a stronger white presence, some will be more of that light blue mixture of the two. And because we're doing this wet on wet, it kind of feathers the edge on its own. It's a little bit like wet blending without the blending portion. And then we simply finish it off with a heavy glaze of green ink. And because of the white that we use, the white picks up that color very well, less so than the blue. So we have a nice little world crystal ball thing that he's holding. And there is our dot wizard. Not too bad considering I really don't stipple that much. Point to note, I did go back, add a little bit more highlighting on the robe and the cloak after the fact. Also a little bit more shadow to the cloak. I just took some thinned dark blue and layered it lightly in the recesses on the cloak as I really thought it needed it. Normally I would layer all of this all one color, which might look technically impressive. It can be a little boring, and just adding this simple texture really helps to spice up the miniature, and it's fairly easy to do as well. You don't have to worry about getting the proper thinness of your paint and taking time to build up all those layers. You just keep stabbing at the miniature until your brush is gone. There's a lot more you can do with stippling. I just barely touched the tip of the iceberg here. You can also stipple in specific patterns, which is something I need to work my way up to. So hopefully this won't be the last dot project, and in the future I'll be doing some more once I get some more practice. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
A man, he flies like a Morris.